The funny thing about old Harry Potter games is that I barely remember the stories. I remember the castle. I remember running around Hogwarts like I was late for a class. I remember collecting beans off the floor, which is disgusting now that I think about it. I remember spell challenges, secret rooms, portraits, staircases, and that feeling that every hallway had some secret behind it. The plot was there, obviously. Voldemort was doing Voldemort stuff. The chamber was being chambery, and Sirius Black was on the loose. But as a kid, the part that mattered was way simpler. The game let me walk around Hogwarts. That was enough to cover a lot of sins. And looking back at the whole main series now, you can see how important that was. Because the further these games get away from that old school fantasy, the more they start grabbing at other genres. Co-op action, errand maps, potion minigames, wand cover shooting. The books get darker, the movies get bigger, and the games keep trying to figure out what Harry Potter even means when you're holding a controller. So I want to go through the main Harry Potter and movie tie-in games in order. Not every Harry Potter game ever made. Not Quidditch World Cup, sadly. Not Lego Harry Potter, again, sadly. Not Hogwarts Legacy. Not the mobile games, not the Kinect ones, just the mainline games. The games that had to take each year's story and turn it into a game. The first Harry Potter game is already a mess to talk about because there's not really one first Harry Potter game. There's the PC version, there's the PlayStation version, there's the Game Boy Color version, there's the Game Boy Advance version, and then just to make the timeline even more cursed, there is a later PlayStation 2, GameCube, and Xbox version that came out in 2003 after the Chamber of Secrets. So the first book basically got multiple different game adaptations within a couple of years. If you played one version as a kid, your memory of the first Harry Potter game might be completely different from someone else's. One person remembers a PC castle full of spell lessons and beans. Someone else remembers the PlayStation version with the early 3D character models that look like they're, trying their best. Someone else remembers the Game Boy Color version, which is basically just a little RPG. And then someone else played the later console version, where the first book gets remade with lessons learned from Chamber. And that is a very interesting thing about this era. Licensed games were not always one game everywhere. They were like a franchise putting on different outfits depending on what hardware you had. But across the versions, the basic idea is pretty clear. Harry goes to Hogwarts, Harry learns spells, Harry explores, and Harry collects things. And throughout all this, Harry gets pulled through the main story beats until he gets to the Philosopher's Stone. And that works because the first book is probably the easiest one to actually translate. It is literally a first year school story. Like, that alone is pretty cool. You arrive at a magic school, you go to classes, you learn new spells, you find locked doors, you slowly figure out something is hidden in the building. That is already a very solid video game. Like, it has all the shape there. The game does not need to invent a reason for Harry to learn abilities because the book already has classes. A spell lesson is a tutorial. A locked door is a progression gate. A hidden wizard card is a collectible. A weird obstacle under the school is a final dungeon. It is almost too clean for a game. It's like perfect. Even when the first game is clunky, fantasy is I want to be a kid at Hogwarts and I have to keep exploring this castle and seeing what it has to offer me. No mystery why Flipendo became burned into people's brains. It's not the deepest spell in the world. It is basically the game saying, here's your interaction button, and that's important. Like, these little things are important when you are building up a wizarding game like this. You slowly train your brain as you play this game to learn that you can just flipendo anything and kind of get your way. The early games get one big thing right here. They make Hogwarts touchable. Not perfectly, not elegantly, but touchable. At that time, reviewers mostly seemed to understand what kind of thing this was. The early reviews were not treating Sorcerer's Stone like it was trying to compete with the deepest adventure games on Earth. They talked about it like it was a kid-focused, licensed game that was simple, uneven, and carried heavily by the license, but charming if you were there for Harry Potter. And that feels right, because if you strip away the license, a lot of the first game is simply collecting and spell challenges. But you can't fully strip away the license. The whole appeal is walking around Hogwarts. For a lot of players, walking around as Harry was the adaptation. Like, that's all it needed to be. The game is not trying to be the most complex version of Harry Potter. It's trying to give a kid the feeling of being inside the first book for a while. And honestly, for 2001, that was pretty good. Chamber of Secrets might be the cleanest early Harry Potter game because the book and the game formula want a lot of the same things. The first game proves that Hogwarts can work as a school adventure. Chamber gets to take that and add a better mystery. The story is extremely game friendly. There's a flying car, there's a castle mystery, there are forbidden areas, there is a diary, there are giant spiders, there's a dueling club. All these things make such a cool game. And to wrap it all up, there's an actual chamber under the school with a final boss snake in it. It's like, it's really perfect. That barely feels like they have to do anything to make that adaptation work. The book is practically handing the developers a checklist of things to do. And again, the platform thing matters. Chamber of Secrets also had different versions across console, PC, and handheld. The book is about a school year being slowly infected by something scary. That game turns the school year into playable routine. No surprise, this game still has a good reputation of people who grew up with it. Maybe the combat is basic, maybe the camera is not always your friend, maybe the collectibles feel a little bit strange, but the shape makes sense. You're living inside the castle while mystery builds underneath it. The film version of Chamber has to move through the school year pretty quickly. It hits the big scenes, but it cannot let you spend hours just being a student. The game can actually do that. And sometimes that means the game accidentally feels closer to the kid fantasy of the book than the movie does. Not because the writing is deeper, it's not, because time works differently in game. A movie has to get to the next scene. A game can take its time. It can walk you across the castle, get lost, find a wizard card, throw a gnome, you can do a lesson, and you can get yelled at. All this stuff adds up to make the fantasy of being a kid in a school so amazing. Reviewers at the time were still very realistic about it. They did not pretend Chamber was secretly some flawless action-adventure masterpiece, but a lot of the reaction was warmer because it captured the world better. The praise usually came back to the same things: atmosphere, fan appeal, recognizable places, and the feeling of being in Hogwarts. The criticism was also familiar: simple gameplay, uneven control, camera issues, some repetition, which is basically the whole Harry Potter game problem in one sentence. The whole castle is better than the mechanics. That's kind of the whole point of these games. And with Chamber, that is enough, because Chamber is the book where the castle really should be the star. It has a secret chamber inside it. Has students getting attacked in the hallways. It has bathrooms becoming plot-critical infrastructure. Chamber understands the assignment better than almost any of the games. Not because it is the biggest, not because it is the most polished, because the game asks you to do the same thing the book wants you to do. Spend time in Hogwarts and slowly realize something is wrong. Prisoner of Azkaban is where the adaptation gets trickier. The first two books are mysterious with pretty clear school year shapes. Prisoner is still a school year mystery, but the heart of it is different. It is about Harry's fear. It is about Sirius Black. It is about Lupin. It is about the past. And it's also weirdly about time travel. That is not super easy to turn into a level. You can make Dementor an enemy pretty easily. You can make Buckbeak a flying sequence. You can make the Shrieking Shack a destination. But the reason Prisoner of Azkaban works as a book, not just because events happen, it works because your understanding of those events change. The scary escaped prisoner is not what you think. The rat is absolutely not a rat. And the guy who you thought might kill Harry becomes one of his only adult connections. That is hard to make a playable game. So the game makes a very smart choice. It makes Harry, Ron, and Hermione playable. That sounds obvious now, but for the first two games, the fantasy is mostly Harry at Hogwarts. In Prisoner, the fantasy becomes more about the trio of them. You can use different characters for different abilities, you solve puzzles with them, and you can switch between them during the gameplay. And that choice works pretty well with Prisoner because it's maybe the first book where the friendship feels less like a side decoration and more like the structure holding everything up. Ron and Hermione are not just standing next to the Chosen One, they are part of how Harry survives the year. So making their friendship a mechanic works. It is not deep character writing, it's not the game suddenly becoming Disco Elysium or something, but it is smart. The game is clearly trying to say that the story is not just about Harry, it is about the group. And that is probably one of the best things that Prisoner does as an adaptation. It cannot fully solve the problem of the book's emotional twists. It cannot make the Marauder's backstory land with the same weight. It cannot turn the time loop into some intricate clockwork system without becoming a totally different game. So it simplifies. It makes the trio useful. It makes Hogwarts explorable. It builds puzzle spaces, and it gives you creature moments and spell moments. And then it moves through the plot. Reviewers at the time seemed to notice that split. The playable trio was a real point of interest, the Hogwarts atmosphere still helped, but the same complaints kept hanging around. Too easy, too simple, not always great camera or controls, and very dependent on already caring about Harry Potter. Which is honestly fair, it's what these games are all about. These games are built for someone who already cares pretty deeply about Hogwarts and Harry Potter. Prisoner works when it lets you try to do that as the trio. It's not the best possible version of the third book, but it finds a playable version of one important idea, and that idea is that Harry is not alone, and that he has friends. And for a licensed game from 2004, that's pretty good. Goblet of Fire is where the series takes a very obvious turn. No more explorable Hogwarts in the same way, no more wandering around the castle as the main fantasy. Now it's level-based, now it is co-op, and now you replay missions to collect Tri-Wizard Shields. So the whole fantasy switches from being a student at Hogwarts to becoming, here are the action levels from Goblet of Fire. Please bring a couple friends with you. And I understand why this happened. Goblet of Fire is a monster of a book. It is huge. It has the Quidditch World Cup, the Tri-Wizard Tournament, the dragons, the lake, the maze, Barty Crouch, Mad Eye Moody, house elves, teenage drama, international schools, Voldemort returning, and a whole mystery that the story is carefully hiding in plain sight. The movie already has to compress it pretty aggressively. The game has to compress the compressed version, so it grabs the easiest video game material, action, creatures, and tournament tasks, alongside some spell combat and 3-player co-op. On paper, that is like a reasonable formula for a game. The Tri-Wizard Tournament is the most obvious playable part of the book. There's dragons. That's a pretty easy game level right there. There's an underwater rescue. Again, another pretty easy game level there. There's a maze. Hey, look, another game level. A graveyard with Voldemort in it. That's a pretty easy final boss right there. So that all makes sense why they decided to do that. But Goblet is also the game where you really feel what gets lost when Harry Potter stops being about inhabiting the school. Because Goblet of Fire, the book, is not just Harry Potter does 3 dangerous sports. It is a year where the school becomes public, international, suspicious, and uncomfortable. Harry is forced into a spectacle. People do not believe him. The press twists things. The adults are missing important details. And that game has almost no room for the texture, because it is busy being a replayable co-op action game. The trade is obvious. It captures the tournament, but it loses the year at school. Reviewers at the time were not exactly subtle about noticing the problem. The multiplayer idea made sense, and some people appreciated that. The game finally let the trio fight together on screen, but the repetition hurt. The level structure hurt, and losing the old Hogwarts exploration hurts a lot. The reason the earlier games worked, even when they were simple, was that they gave you little school life. Goblet gives you the highlight reel, and for a book as big and messy as Goblet of Fire, the highlight reel is just not enough. It is funny because Goblet should be one of the easiest books to make exciting. It literally has dragons and a deadly tournament and like a crazy graveyard climax. It has Voldemort actually returning. But as a Harry Potter game, it feels less magical than Chambers because it spends less time letting you be at Hogwarts. The series keeps relearning the same lesson. The action is not the fantasy. The place is the fantasy. Order of the Phoenix learns that lesson very loudly. After Goblet pulls away from Hogwarts exploration, Order basically runs back to the castle and says, whoopsie daisy, that's what we're supposed to do. Honestly, the correct instinct from the developers here. Order of the Phoenix is a difficult book to adapt because it is enormous and a lot of it is not traditionally game-shaped. It is not built around one clean adventure. It is about institutions. The Ministry lying, the school being taken over, Umbridge turning rules into a weapon, students organizing in secret, Harry feeling angry, isolated, watched, and ignored. That is a great story, but it's not exactly a list of fun levels. So the game chooses Hogwarts. It rebuilds the school as this big explorable space and sends you through it, recruiting Dumbledore's army, finding people, doing tasks, discovering rooms, using spells, and basically turning the castle into the main character. For Order, that is the right call. Because if Order of the Phoenix is about being trapped inside a school that is slowly becoming hostile, then letting the player move through that school makes perfect sense. You feel the institution, you feel the distance between places, you feel the portraits, the staircases, the halls, the courtyards, all of it pressing down on you. You feel that Hogwarts is not just the background, it is the battleground. Order of the Phoenix's strongest asset is the castle itself. At the time, reviewers basically split along that line. People praised the castle. They liked that Hogwarts felt bigger, more faithful, and more explorable. The Wii version also had that perfect 2007 idea where you flick the remote to cast spells, because every Wii game had to have something like that. And for Harry Potter, honestly, it worked pretty well. That's what they did in the movies. But then there's the actual gameplay. A lot of reviewers complained that the game was full of errands, which is also a fair critique. You don't want to be playing a chore simulator. Because Order of the Phoenix, the game, has this strange thing where the best part is walking through Hogwarts, but the reason you are walking through Hogwarts is often just to go grab some random kid's object. But I still think Order is one of the most important games in the series, because it understands the core fantasy better than Goblet did. It's not trying to turn Harry Potter into a generic action game. It is trying to make Hogwarts a place again. And even if the tasks are basic, it's still a fun game. You get to enjoy some time in Hogwarts. Order of the Phoenix is the book where Hogwarts stops feeling fully safe. Umbridge is there, rules are everywhere, students are watching themselves. Secret meetings are happening, so running around the castle to build a resistance club is not a bad game interpretation. It just needed better things to do while you were running. So pretty much the review of Order of the Phoenix is great Hogwarts, but too many chores to do, which kind of actually sounds like real school. So maybe it was immersive, but not for the right reasons. Half-Blood Prince keeps the big Hogwarts idea from Order of the Phoenix, but it has a different problem. Order of the Phoenix is politically messy, but at least the game can say, go around, recruit some students, resist Umbridge, and explore the castle. Half-Blood Prince is harder, because the book is mostly atmosphere and dread. It is Harry getting older, it is people dating, it is Draco being suspicious, it is the Half-Blood Prince's textbook, it is memories of Voldemort's past, it is Dumbledore slowly preparing Harry for something awful. It's a school year where normal teenage nonsense and extremely dark history are happening at the same time. But as a game designer, what do you do with all that? Experience the emotional discomfort of knowing the happy parts cannot last. Great, that's... How am I supposed to incorporate that into a level? So the game pulls mostly of the playable pieces. Potions, dueling, Quidditch, some Hogwarts exploration, and that makes sense. It's probably what fits the best. Potions are probably the smartest fit because half of the Half-Blood Prince is literally a school textbook cheating scheme. The idea of Harry getting better at potions because of weird annotations is a very fun detail, but I don't really know how you tie that into the game. Quidditch also makes sense because one of the last times the school sports feeling is still alive before the series gets fully swallowed by the war. Dueling makes sense because danger is building in the universe, so obviously the students need to be prepared. So as a collection of activities, Half-Blood Prince does make sense and it is logical. The problem is that the actual soul of the book is not really in those activities. The soul is in the suspicion, memory, romance, and the loss. That weird feeling that everyone is still trying to have a normal school year, even though the world is obviously getting worse. And the game cannot hold that same feeling for very long. It becomes much more of creating a potion, going to a duel, flying, follow nearly Headless Nick to do the next thing, and then repeat. Reviews at the time picked up on that. The reaction was often warmer than Deathly Hallows would be later, because at least Hogwarts was there, and the game still had that basic comfort food. But people also called it shallow, repetitive, and thin. It had the place, it had the activities, it had the production value, but it did not fully have the dread that the books had. And to be fair, I do not know if a movie tie-in game from 2009 was ever going to solve that. The best possible Half-Blood Prince game would probably be less about constant action and much more about being a student detective inside a school that is slowly losing its innocence. But that is a weirder commercial pitch, so instead we got the safe version. Hogwarts, potions, duels, and Quidditch. That's not terrible, but it's just not the book. Half-Blood Prince is one of those adaptations where you can feel the game touching the correct objects without always knowing why they mattered. The game keeps the parts that can become minigames and leaves a lot of the ache behind. Deathly Hallows Part 1 is where the series hits the wall, because the old Harry Potter game formula was secretly built on one thing: Hogwarts. And even when the mechanics were simple, Hogwarts gave the games a shape. It gave you classes, it gave you corridors, it gave you secret areas to explore. It gave you the house points, classmates, and it gave you a reason to wander. Deathly Hallows Part 1 takes that away from you. The story wants that absence to hurt. Harry, Ron, and Hermione are not at school. They are isolated. They are moving from place to place. They are hiding. They are scared. They are mad at each other. The book is not fun in the same way the early books are fun. It is tense and lonely. The movie understands this by becoming this darker road story, but the game has a production problem. What do you play? You cannot go to potions class. You cannot collect beans in a cozy hallway. You cannot just let people wander around Hogwarts because Hogwarts is absent. So the game does the most late 2000s, early 2010s thing possible. It becomes a third-person action game. Harry uses cover, spells work like weapons, enemies show up in waves. All of a sudden, you're playing Call of Duty. Invisible Cloak becomes a stealth item. The whole thing starts feeling less like Harry Potter. And look, I get it. I understand it. Deathly Hallows has a lot more open conflict. The world is dangerous. Snatchers exist. Death Eaters exist. Harry is literally being hunted. You could turn that into combat, but the adaptation feels wrong because combat is not what makes that part of the story work. The interesting part of Deathly Hallows Part 1 is not that Harry is constantly winning fights, is that he does not know where to go, is that the trio is cut off from the place that used to structure their lives, is the magical world feels hostile and empty to them. A good Deathly Hallows Part 1 game would probably have to be slower, stranger, and more survival focused. That is not the game they made. They made Call of Duty with wands, and reviewers at the time were brutal about it. They were talking about how generic it felt, how repetitive it was, and how it did not even capture the Harry Potter spirit at all. The funny but sad part is how clearly the game exposes the problem. Deathly Hallows Part 1 accidentally proves how important Hogwarts was. Once the castle is gone, the game has to reveal what else it thinks Harry Potter is. And the answer is combat encounters, I guess. That is just not enough for me. It is not enough because magic in Harry Potter was never just projectiles. Magic was moving staircases, secret passages, talking porches, books that bite you, ridiculous candy, dangerous plants, and weird moments. Deathly Hallows Part 1 keeps the spell and loses the whole ecosystem. Deathly Hallows Part 2 is a little more understandable as an action game. The story is the final battle. Hogwarts is under attack. Characters are fighting everywhere. The movie is basically a war climax. So if any Harry Potter story is going to become a linear action game, this is the one that makes the most sense. The game also lets you play as different characters at points, which is a pretty decent idea. By the end of the book, the story is bigger than Harry's direct perspective. The Battle of Hogwarts belongs to a lot of people, so widening the playable cast is not a bad instinct here. The problem is that the language of the game is still cover shooter. Move forward, hide. Fire spells, clear enemies, move forward, and repeat. And then eventually a boss fight. You just keep repeating that until wizard fascism has been addressed. And yes, Part 2 has more natural action than Part 1, but it still makes magic feel strangely ordinary. That is maybe the biggest issue with the Deathly Hallows game. They do not make magic feel mysterious or playful or school-like, or dangerous even in a magical way. They make magic feel like ammo types. This spell is your basic shot. This spell is your heavier shot. This spell breaks shields. This spell does the other shooter thing. And mechanically, I get it. It makes sense for a video game. Gamers need readable systems that make sense, and combat needs to be understood. But Harry Potter magic loses something when every spell becomes like a weapon category. The final book has so many emotional payoffs with Snape's memories, the Resurrection Stone, Harry walking into the forest. The first games use spells to make school interactive. The last games use spells to make cover shooting brain dead. That is not the same type of magic. Reviewers still did not love it. Some were basically willing to say, oh, okay, this one fits better the story than Part 1. But the common problems remained. Short, repetitive, generic, not especially satisfying unless you just needed to see the final movie turned into playable action. And I think that is the real tragedy of the main Harry Potter game line. It ends in the one place that should be emotionally huge. Hogwarts was under siege, but because the game language is so narrow, it feels smaller than it should. The castle is back, but not in the way that made people love it. You are not exploring it, you're not discovering it, you're not getting lost in it. You are fighting through it. And there is a large difference. Going to these games in order, I do not think the story is just old licensed games were bad. Some of them are rough, some of them are very rough. Some of them absolutely have that feeling where the box art and the music are doing community service for the mechanics. But the more interesting story is how specific the adaptation problem was. The obvious bits were never the hard part. Spells, creatures, Quidditch, bosses, collectibles, those are easy to point at. The harder thing is the day-to-day magic. The feeling of being at Hogwarts. The castle, the secrets, the lessons, and the sense that the world has rules nobody fully explained to you yet. The first game is clunky, but it's still important because it makes the first year fantasy playable. Chamber of Secrets works better than it probably should because the book's mystery and the game's school loop fit together almost perfectly. Prisoner of Azkaban adding Ron and Hermione as playable characters feels meaningful because friendship turns into the mechanic. Goblet of Fire feels like such a break because it adapts the spectacle and loses the school year texture. Order of the Phoenix is more interesting than its errands because the castle is genuinely the prize. Half-Blood Prince can feel pleasant and hollow at the same time because it has Hogwarts, but the book's real weight is harder to press buttons for. Deathly Hallows falls apart as a game series because it removes Hogwarts, and the games do not know how to replace it except with combat. The best Harry Potter games are not the ones with the most action, they are the ones where magic changes how you experience a place. The trick was place, not firepower. Magic is not just shooting a guy, magic is a portrait asking you for a password. When the game understands that, they worked. And when the games were simple, they worked. I think that is why people still talk about the early Harry Potter games with so much affection. Not because they were secretly flawless, they clearly were not. If you go back now, you're going to find a lot of jank, quite quickly. You're going to find simple objectives, weird platforming, repetitive collectibles, but you're also going to find the thing they understood. They knew what people wanted to be in Hogwarts. They knew that a Harry Potter game could be small, simple, and kind of goofy as long as the castle felt worth walking through. Later, the series drifts away from that. The games get bigger, the movies get darker, the action gets louder, but the magic gets narrower. By the end, spells are just projectiles, and Hogwarts is just a battlefield. And maybe that was inevitable because the books themselves move away from school comfort and towards war. But I still think the games reveal something useful. Harry Potter was never at its best when magic was just combat. It was at its best when magic made the ordinary world feel strange. And for a few years, even through all the licensed game weirdness, the Harry Potter games got close enough to that feeling that people remembered them for the rest of their lives. Not because every spell challenge was good, not because every review was glowing, because for a little while, you could walk around Hogwarts and annoy every object in the building with a flipendo. And honestly, as childhood fantasies go, that's pretty strong. That's all I got for this video. If you enjoyed it, please leave a like, subscribe, comment down below what you'd like to see next time, or your opinions, or if I did something wrong. I'd love to hear it. I'll see you next time. Thanks again for watching. I really appreciate it.